This is a short video on imperfect verbs introduction. Just like perfect, imperfect includes a subject in the actual verb form. However, unlike perfect, the imperfect, the subject is at the beginning. And unlike the perfect, which was completed action, imperfect is incompleted action. When looking at the verb itself, the steps are very similar to deciphering the perfect and translating the perfect. So first you need to find the three root letters which will give you the meaning of the verb. So for example, verb bana, if you find the three root letter bet nun he, it would mean to build, or verb katal, which would mean to kill. So if you see a verb, you identify the three root letters, you will know the basic meaning of the verb in English. The second step is finding the form of the verb. And just like with the perfect, also imperfect gives you tells you two things. So if you find the form, it tells you first of all that it is an imperfect, and second of all, it tells you the person. For example, if you see an aleph at the beginning of a verb, you know it's I, or the first person. If you see a tav, it could be, for example, you. So this is how it looks like on a verb. You have the three root letters and you have aleph at the beginning. That would be the form, and aleph, that would be the first common singular. Here it is how it would look like with the actual verb katal. So you have aleph and then you have the three root letters. These are the forms of the imperfect. For the first person is aleph. I'm going to skip to first person plural, that's nun. So aleph first person singular, nun first person plural. And then looking down at a third person masculine, it's yod. So if you see a yod, you know you are in a third person masculine. If you look at the end, if there is an u, it's plural. If there is nothing, it's singular. So the u is the sign of masculine plural, and the yod is sign of third masculine. So if you see a yod, it is definitely a third masculine, and then you just need to look at the end. If there is nothing, it's singular. If there is u, it's plural. Every other form starts with a tav. And then looking at the difference between all those tavs, feminine singular has the yod at the end, and the other two singulars, the two second masculine singular and third feminine singular, they have nothing and they are actually identical. The only way you know the difference between the two is from the context. If you look at the plural, the u, we already seen with the third masculine singular, is the sign of masculine plural. So if you see the u, that's the sign of masculine plural. If you see na, which you already know from before, and you also can hear the a, the feminine sound, that's the feminine plural ending. Okay, so aleph, first person I, nun, first person we, plural. Yod, without the u at the end is he. Yod with the u at the end is they. And then the tav can be either you, masculine, or she, feminine. Context determines which one it is. If it is tav and the yod at the end, it's you, feminine. Then looking at the plural, tav with the u at the end, that's you, plural, masculine group. Tav and na at the end, that's you, feminine group. And finally, tav and na, that could be a feminine they. Again, these two, 2FP and 3FP, they look identical. You know the difference only by the context. So the next step, step number 3, you look at the vowels and see the stem. Just like with the perfect, it can be kal, nifal, piel, pual, hitpal, hifil, hofal. Kal, piel are active, nifal, pual are passive. Hitpal is a reflexive form. Hifil is causative active, and hofal is causative passive. These are the vowels. This is a summary of the vowels. So if under the preformative And by preformative, I mean these letters. So either Aleph, Nun, Tav, or Yod. So the letters that are before the three root letters. If under the preformative is Yod, then it can be either Kal, Nifal, or Hitpal. You have three options: Kal, Nifal, Hitpal. You can go by process of elimination. Hitpal is the easiest one to recognize because it needs the extra Tav, so it would be It. Nifal needs the Dagesh in the first root letter. So the first root letter over here would have a Dagesh, and finally everything else is going to be Kal. If you see a Shava, you have two options, either Piel or Pual. And again, you can go by process of elimination. Pual is not that common, and it's quite easy to see. It would need an U under the first root letter. So under the first letter following the preformative, there would be an U. And everything else is Piel. Also remember that Piel and Pual need a Dagesh in the middle root letter, just like Hitpal. Hifil has A and Hofal has O. So again, E, Kal, Nifal, or Hitpal. Hitpal would need Tav, so it would be Yit, and then Dagesh in the middle, of course. Nifal would need a Dagesh in the first root letter, and everything else is Kal. Shava, Piel or Pual. Pual has a U under the first root letter, and Dagesh in the middle, and everything else is Piel. A is Hifil, O is Hofal. In translation for the imperfect, this is an incompleted action and therefore it is future. With the word to kill, the translation would be the following: active, simple, that would be Kal, would be I will kill, or PL, intensive, would be I will kill. Do not stress too much in English translation the differences between Kal and PL. For the passive of Kal is Nifal, I will be killed. I'm not doing the action, somebody else is doing the action. Same thing for Pual, which is the passive of PL, so I will be killed. And finally, reflexive of PL is Hitpal, I will kill myself. So I do the action and I receive the action. The causatives, Hifil and Hofal. Hifil, I will cause, and then you have the verb, so I will cause to kill. I will cause someone to kill. And passive, I will be caused to kill. So someone will make me to kill. So here we are going to look at some examples. This is how the form would look with the vowels. So you have the three root letters, katal. You have the aleph, which is the first common singular. And then with the vowels, E, the options are either Hitpal or Nifal or Kal. Hitpal would have an extra Tav, so it would look like this. So it would be Yit. If we would have a Nifal, Nifal would need a Dagesh in the first root letter, so it would look like that. And the Dagesh is actually the Nun, because what happened that originally Nifal, as you know, has a Nun, but every time you put something before Nun, that Nun disappears and it goes into a Dagesh in the following ruler. So this Dagesh is actually the missing Nun. It's not missing, it's hiding in that first root letter. But since we do not have it there, then we know that the third option, everything else, is Kal. So here are the steps of translating. Find the three root letters. For example, Bana, it would be to build. Katal would be to kill. Step number 2, find the verb form for the imperfect. So, and it's an incompleted action. So this is going to be future. Aleph, for example, would be I will do this action, so I will build, I will kill, and you would be, for example, Tav. And finally look at the vowels and find the stem, Kal, Nifal, Piel, Pual, Hitpal, Hifil, or Hofal. This is how a translation would look like in comparison with the perfect. Regular perfect is I built, completed action, a house. Regular imperfect would be I will be building a house or I will build a house. Both of these translations are correct. The emphasis of imperfect is not on the completion of the action but on the action actually taking place. The emphasis of perfect is on the action being completed. So here we know that the house will be built and completed. Here are three examples. Arbe, we have first three letters is Raba, which means to be big or great or many. We know the form is Aleph, and it tells us the first common singular, so it's I will do this action. The action is in the future, it's an imperfect. So again, the Aleph tells us two things. First of all, it tells us that it is imperfect, and second of all, it tells us the person, which is 1cs. And finally, if you look at the vowels, the A underneath, the short A, patach, that tells us it's a he feel, so it's a causative. So in translation, it will be I will cause, causative, right? I will cause two. And then we have the meaning of the verb to be many or to be great, or you could just say I will multiply. Sometimes with the he feel and hofal, in English we do have a word that we can use instead of using the word cause. You can actually come up with a vocabulary word. Sometimes it doesn't work, so sometimes you can just say cause. However, for a simple translation, just start with the word cause, and then if there is a better way to translate it, then you can do a smoother translation. Like in this case, you can, instead of I will cause to be many, in English you can say I will multiply. Second example, varalo timatse v'cha. So the verb is right here, timatse. The root is matza, the three root letters, which means to find. It starts with the tav that tells us two things. First of all, it tells us it is an imperfect, and second of all, it tells us the person. We actually have two options. It's either second masculine singular or third feminine singular. And the translation will be, as a second masculine, would be you will find or she will find. And then we look at the vowels. We see that it starts with E, so we have three options. It's either kal, nifal, or hitpail. Hitpail would need extra tav, right? So it would look like this. It would be tit. However, we don't have the tav, so it's not hitpail. Nifal needs the dagesh in the first root letter, and we actually do have the dagesh in the first letter, so this is nifal, which would be passive. So in translation, we need to translate this as passive. In other words, the person is not doing the action but is receiving. So he's not finding, but he is being found. The translation of the entire sentence, and evil, ra'a is evil, and evil, lo is negation, so evil will not be found, b'cha in, and cha is a suffix to ms, in you. So nifal passive, someone else is doing the action, and notice that the evil is not finding, the evil is not doing the finding, it is being found. Final example, tadabru el esav. The verb is at the beginning. Usually in Hebrew, the verb is at the beginning. Remember that in English, we cannot start with the verb. You always have to start with the subject and then you have the verb. In Hebrew, sentence order is not set. It can be reversed for emphasis, but the usual sentence order is verb, then subject, and then object. So, tadabru, the three root letters are dabar, which means to speak. Then we see that it starts with taf and ends with u. U we saw as the ending for masculine plural, and if it would be yod, it's third, but taf is second. So it's a second masculine plural, imperfect. Again, if you see the form of the verb, it tells us two things. First of all, it tells us, in this case, that it's an imperfect, and it tells us the person, which is 2mp, second masculine plural. And if we look at the vowels, it tells us the stem sheva. We have two options. It's either pual or pl. We can double check that we have the dagesh in the middle, and we do. So it is either pual or pl. Pual would have a u under the first root letter. In other words, it would look something like this. But we do not have the u, so therefore it is pl. So it's active. So in translation, you, speaking about the group of men, so it's a plural, you will speak to Esau. Or if you are from South, from Texas, you can say y'all will speak to Esau. It's a group of people. Okay, what happens when we add a regular vav conjunction? Just like with the perfect, where we moved from the past to future, so now imperfect moves from future to past in English. However, the meaning of incompleted action remains the same. This is what happens. We have the verb, we have the three root letters, we have the form of the verb, the aleph, which tells us it's an imperfect, and it also tells us the person, which is 1cs. We have the vowel e, which gives us three options: kal, nifa, or hitpile. In this case, it would be kal, because hitpile would need extra taf, and nifa would need dagesh in this first root letter. And then we add the vav, and this is just a regular vav conjunction, and we know that because of the vowel underneath. And I'll show you the options for the vowels later in a later slide. This is how it would look like with the actual verb in it, va-ik-tol. So we have vav, and we have aleph with the e, and then we have the verb katal with the katol vowels in it. So the steps: find the three root letters, find the verb form. It tells you the aspect, it's either perfect or imperfect. It tells you present gender number. Look at the vowels to see the stem, kal, nifal, pia, pual, hitpal, hifil, hofal, and then finally the vav reverses the tense of the English verb. Note that the type of the action is still the same. Imperfect is still incompleted action. Okay, it doesn't turn into a perfect, but it's still an incompleted action. But now it is incompleted in the past. In the past. There we go. So then we have a second option, vav consecutive. Actually, let's first look at a summary. So perfect, I built a house. Imperfect, I will be building a house, or I will build a house, a future, right? This is perfect is completed, imperfect is incompleted. If we add vav conjunction to perfect, it turns the completed action to future. I will build a house. Again, this is still completed action, but now it's completed in the future. If we add vav conjunction to an imperfect, it will turn from I will be building a house to I was building a house. It is still an incompleted action, but now it's incompleted in the past tense. The emphasis here is on doing the action, while here the emphasis of the perfect is on finishing the action. Moving on to vav consecutive. Let's first look at the forms. Vav conjunction can have many forms, and these are the three most common. You can have a sheva under the vav, you can have it as an u or as an o. So it's either v, u, or o. You see the vav, and you can have many different types of vowels. These three are the three most common. Vav consecutive is limited to basically two options. The short a would be the most common, or you can have the long a in some other forms. So it's either va or va. You will hear that a sound under the vav. That is a vav consecutive. So the form should be by now simple to recognize. You have the three root letters. You have the aleph, which tells you it's an imperfect, and it also tells you the person, 1cs. You have the vowel e, which tells you it's a cow. And now we have a vav, and because of the a underneath, we know it's not just conjunction, but it's a vav consecutive. This is how it would look like within actual verb. The steps are the same, however, look at the final step. So step number 4, verb consecutive, it functions just like the regular verb. So whatever the regular verb did, verb consecutive does the same thing. It reverses imperfect from future to past. However, it adds to the idea of consecutive time. So we have verb conjunction plus the idea of a consecutive time. What does it do to translation? In translation, you may use words like then or after that or later. You can also use and just know and understand from context that these actions are taking place one after the other. But sometimes you don't have to keep translating every verb consecutive as and, but you can say later, you can say after that, or then. So this is how it looks like on this chart. Perfect, I built a house. Imperfect, incomplete, I will be building a house, or I will build a house. With the regular verb conjunction, it just reverses the tense, and I will build a house, again completed action in the future now. Imperfect, and I was building a house, or I built a house, incompleted action in the past. Verb conjunction, it is identical to verb consecutive. So verb consecutive, verb conjunction are identical. The only thing that verb consecutive adds is the translation of and. Instead of just simple and, there is a consecutive time. So after that, I was building a house, or then I was building a house, or later I was building a house, or any other English translation that helps you understand that this action is taking place after what just happened before. Here are some examples. Here are 3 examples. Vatishlach, vatikra, lajakov. These 2 verbs, as you can see, have a similar form. So the first one, the root is shalach, which means to send. The second one, the root is kara, which means to call. So shalach, kara. They both start with tav, which we have 2 options. It's either 2ms or 3fs, and we know it's an imperfect. So it tells us 2 things. First of all, the aspect, in this case imperfect. Second of all, it tells us the person, and in this case it could be the 2ms or 3fs. From the actual context, we can determine which one is the correct translation. Then we look at the vowel. We have an e in both. We have 3 options: hitpile, nifal, or kal. So kal, nifal, or hitpile. Hitpile needs the extra tav. We don't have that. Nifal needs a dagesh in the first root letter. We don't have that either. And by default, everything else is kal. And finally, if you look at the beginning, these are vav, and these are not just consecutive, but are, they're not just conjunctions, but they're consecutives because they have the a sound. So in translation, we could say after that, or then, she sent, or you sent, depending on the context, and you called to Jacob, or she called to Jacob. From the context, it is actually 3fs, so then the whole sentence will be after that, she sent and she called to Jacob, or for Jacob. Second example, Vaichratu shnehem barit. So the verb is right here at the beginning, as it usually is in Hebrew. We have 3 root letters, karat, which means to cut. We start with yod, and every time a verb starts with yod, we know it is third masculine. Then we look at the end. If there is nothing, it's singular. If there is an u, it's plural. So in this case, it would be plural. And it also tells us an imperfect. So the yod tells us 2 things. First of all, the aspect, in this case, imperfect. And second, the person, in this case, third masculine, because of the u, plural. If we look at the vowels, E, we have 3 options, either kal, nifal, hitpile. Hitpile is the extra tav. Nifal wouldn't have a dagesh in the first root letter. We don't have that, so it is kal. And we have a vav consecutive. Again, we have the a, so it's a consecutive. So the translation, then they, plural 3M, then they cut, the two of them, a covenant. Or in English we can say they made a covenant. Literally in Hebrew it's you cut a covenant, but in English we can just translate and then they made a covenant, the two of them, literally. And the final example, Vaishlach David Vaidaber Ba'avigail. We again have two verbs, and they are both in the same form. They both have the yod. So first the roots, shalach, which means again to send, we just had that, and davar, which means to speak. By the way, a side note, davar is always in the PL group. It's never ever in Kal. So the way you learned it, the lexical form, is actually a made-up word. It never occurs in actual Hebrew. It's made up only for lexical purposes. In Hebrew, it is always in PL. So looking at the first verb, it starts with the yod, so it tells us the third masculine. And then we look at the end, if there is no u, it's singular. So it's third masculine singular imperfect. We look at the vowel, it's an E. We have three options, kal, nifal, or hitpile. We don't have the extra tav, it's not hitpile. We don't have the dagesh in the first root letter, it's not nifal, so therefore it's kal. And we have the vav consecutive again because of the a underneath. So then or after that, he sent, and then we have David. In Hebrew, usually the verb is at the beginning, and after that we have the subject. In English, we do the opposite. We start with the subject, and then we have the verb. So start over here, then David sent. Okay, in Hebrew, we have then he sent David, but in English, we say then David sent. And then he spoke. Now here we have a shava. With shava we have two options, either piel or pual. Pual have the u under the dalet, under the first root letter. We don't have that, so it's a piel. And then he spoke ba, with, and then we have a name, Avigail. And that's just a feminine name. By the way, it is composed out of words that you know. Avi means Av is a father, E is my, right? So it's my father. And Gail means to rejoice. My father rejoiced.